Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi, this episode is about digital nomads, who they increasingly are, where they are, why, and how their working lives are evolving and normalizing. Are you ready to try being or hiring a digital nomad? Digital nomads are developing and enjoying expanded professional acceptance and opportunities, while optimizing their work performance through greater self-knowledge and mutually informative discussion with clients, managers, and team members. Facilitated by technology and emerging ventures and adventures, they can now adapt their personal profiles to nurture family and community, and are continuing, but slowing down travel for more sustainable lives. More extensive digitalization has reduced the barriers and increased the flow of employees, as well as non-employees, desirous of exploring work-related and work-facilitated, wider-reaching experiences. So I'm delighted to be talking to Rowena Hennigan, a remote work expert who has worked remotely herself since 2007, and whose ethos is, work is not a place. Rowena is a published academic author and researcher who has been designing and delivering postgrad and executive education with Technology University Dublin, TU Dublin, since 2015. Rowena is also a LinkedIn Global Top Voices 2022 in remote work. Hi, Rowena, how are you?
Fantastic, Sophie. At last we get to speak. I'm delighted.
I know, me too. It has been because you were traveling a lot, right? Surprise, surprise. You were in Bosnia. We'll get to that later. But in your digital nomad life, of course, you are moving from place to place. And I want to really get into so many of the things that a digital nomad life and a family life goes through and deals with and overcomes and enjoys. But first of all, starting at the beginning, how did you get to this place?
Great question. This time 6 years ago, I was staring at 4 damp walls in a house in Dublin with a small, very ill toddler. So our daughter had chronic childhood asthma. I was recovering from the birth. She was around 2, turning 3 at this stage. And how did I get to appreciating global mobility? How did my family get to it? Purely out of desperation, Sophie. We were just at our wits' end. She'd been so sick for 2 years. And unfortunately, when a child has problems with their chest, one of the main ways, if you live in a damp climate, and Ireland is very damp, is to seek out a dry climate.
Right.
And so that's where we live now in Spain. We moved 5.5 years ago, and remote work enabled that.
Directly to Spain?
Directly to Spain. We did a little bit of research. I have to say it wasn't very thorough because we were so exhausted.
Right.
I was practically not working because I was chronically fatigued. And we were just getting through one day at a time with her being ill. So we chose a country move for her health.
So you moved to Spain, and I'm happy to know that your daughter is doing well. But then you didn't stop there.
No, so the way we approached our life then, other than trying to settle as a family and integrate to a point, took about 2-3 years for her health to recover.
Okay.
And fully, we got various amazing treatments in Spain, but the main thing was the dry weather.
Sure.
There was a massive change within 12 months. And essentially, we did what lots of modern families might do. What we were thinking of doing in Ireland was, maybe we should buy a house, or maybe we should. And then we went, hang on, we're globally mobile if we don't. I mean, we do have a base here, we rent. But as a family, myself and my partner, and now her, we sat down and discussed being able to move as and when we want.
What year was
So
this? Because this is just before the
it
pandemic.
was just before the pandemic. Yeah. And we spent some time over that year because she was just in her first year of initial schooling. In Indonesia, I have family there. We were traveling around in Vietnam and Malaysia over 3 months. And it kind of dawned on us. We said, hang on, if we take care of our budgeting and things, we can do this 3-4 months a year. And particularly because we were thinking she's in school in Spain at this point again, maybe we'll just, that's 4 months, nearly 5 months of holidays a year, believe it or not, with Spanish schooling.
Right.
So we said, we'll keep being globally mobile. Okay, we might be called part-time digital nomad family, but that's how we live our lives.
Okay, so it was a progression saying, okay, we'll take all the holidays and we'll travel doing which is fantastic, particularly having very deliberately traveled a lot with my kids. First of all, to help them understand growing up in the States that they're also English and a lot of Italian blood in there too. So this was an evolution that was a number of months a year that you could do that. Okay, so it was incremental steps.
Totally. And during the pandemic as well, we had some beautiful examples. Because I'm sure you remember as well in the States, some of the borders here in Aragon and Spain only opened in the regions for a few weeks at a time. And during one of the summers, we escaped and we went to the coastline near Tarragona for 2.5 months. 2 summers ago, we found ourselves in Gran Canaria for 3 months, again with still some COVID lockdowns happening. So that mobility is precious to us now. And we just want to be able to move and keep moving. Mortgage is a dirty word in our house. Sophie?
How is she adapting to that in terms of schooling? Because she's then starting to get into more serious schooling, or because it was that transition because of COVID, that she was then getting used to a different way of approaching school and it being more virtual, as well as you as a family having that mindset shift to, these things can all be done differently. Why don't we?
Totally. Well, so in the 2 examples I used during the pandemic, they were actually officially summer holidays. So she's quite young. At this point, she's like 6, 7. So schooling's not that serious yet. Right. It's only actually gotten semi-serious here in Spain since she started in September. Right. But also, of course, during the full lockdowns, my partner, who is wonderful at these things, was also supporting her through her learning. And therefore, we were doing some things virtually, we were doing some things at home. But what's really interesting living in Spain, which might be of interest to people listening, is, of course, there's an academic element in lots of countries, but they really value extracurricular and these summer camps. So certainly for her age, the things I can tell you she did over those 2 summers, she learned how to paddleboard. She was kayaking on the bay in Gran Canaria. She went to she was on the beach lots when we were in Tarragona, lots of outdoor activities. Yeah. She's very, very active. Now, I'm not talking full day activities. I'm talking morning type things, like what might be summer camps maybe in North America. But certainly for us as a family, we really value, she's an only child, so we really value that type of thing for her. Anything that involves activities, play, being outside, nature, the beach. So certainly in those 2 examples, a bit different from your older children. So obviously it's very different when they're older and they're maybe having to do. But it might be worth popping in here that because we're both tech workers, essentially my partner is a leader in a remote company as well, that actually we really concentrate on non-device time, Sophie, and we really concentrate on when we're with her and when we're in family time together. There won't be a lot of devices. She doesn't have a device. We really concentrate, like she's reading now in both Spanish and English. Last night we were reading some books with her. So I guess it just depends on the family values, what you're thinking of. But yeah, everything's possible in the world. The world has just changed so much, even during COVID. But for us, it's that ability to be mobile and also flexibility of choice about where we may live, work and educate her in the future. And I'll be honest with you, we're not sure if that'll definitely be Spain, but certainly we definitely want to keep up the Spanish. But we also, given we've come through a global crisis, and I think the pandemic has brushed over much more than it should be. Being able to move, maybe we would have had to go back to Ireland, whatever it may be, that's priceless to us.
When you're looking at and talking about digital work, and whether it's to the employer or to potential employees who might want to be digital nomads, in terms of your skills and what you do and the types of jobs that you and your partner do, but also how you work. I often look to freelancers and entrepreneurs who are really good at understanding, or they've had to learn how they work so that they can be effective, because otherwise they're not going to succeed. Are there other things, if somebody wants to prepare themselves to be testing the digital nomad life, in terms of what they need to better understand about themselves, that you have learned about yourself in order to be effective in this type of setup?
Well, definitely you have to be able to teach whatever. I mean, teaching for me, I'm a teacher at heart. I still work with 2 universities, and therefore being able to show and teach and understand something to the nth degree is being able to teach and show it to someone virtually. So if we can get into a room and we can sit down and show someone what we mean by, oh, this is how you publish a blog post with X, Y, and Z details. Imagine how you do that virtually in the tools we have. And we have share screen, and we have imagery, and we have Loom for recording videos now, and all of that good stuff. But that's what I mean. That's a really important.
So it's being able to project yourself. So effectively, teaching, I guess, in that essence, is being able to convey your meaning effectively and ensure on the other side, of course, for a good teacher, means that the other person actually understands and gets what you're saying. Right.
Exactly, validating that. So that's the next step. So it's one thing to stand there and present,
right,
whether it be virtually or in person, but have they understood that? Have you validated, by an exchange, a conversation, whatever those checks may be? And that's where, when we talk about remote best practice, I see a total lean over here, because I went through it during the pandemic when all my classes went fully online with the university in Dublin. I actually set up some mini virtual learning agreements with some of my groups, my classes, so that we had some common ground and agreement on, if we're all turning up to these sessions on video, how do I know you're interacting at a certain level? How do I know you're learning?
Okay.
How do I know? What will I look? How will I know? As well as obviously assessment and the normal checks and balances.
This is where I get to, obviously, in terms of empathy, in terms of being able to read people. I think you have to have a certain amount of self-awareness to be able to understand, to be able to answer those questions, right? How will I be able to convey to you in the moment, during the class, that I'm nodding, or I'm actually giving you some visual indicators or potentially audible ones, like, but that isn't necessarily obvious, because people are different in terms of how they react and how they listen and learn.
Brilliant question. So you set it up right from the get-go, and I didn't get this right. I didn't get this right straight away. So this was a hardcore learning during the pandemic, and sometimes I had to backtrack with the different classes, but I would actually put something up on the learning management system and give examples of what. So I would say, a thumbs
help
up,
people, right.
Comments in the chat could be an example of showing engagement. But that the live class, going asynchronous, the asynchronous theory wasn't all the get-go or get-all. They could use the form on the LMS.
Right.
They could ask questions. They could submit. So there's all these touch points.
So then you move to the combination of asynchronous and synchronous learning.
Exactly. Yep. And then
right.
you just, over those next weeks, during a module, during a trimester, you go back and you try and check in on that, and you try and validate, and you repeat. I can see some of you are engaged because you just answered the poll. Perhaps some of the rest of you, I'll be very careful with my language here, Sophie, would like to comment in chat or use reactions. Right. Maybe some of the others would have questions for later. You can use the forum for that, etc.
So huge learnings for you, particularly in that setting. And obviously those were translatable, I imagine, in terms of other work that you were doing thanks to your students.
I learned from them as much. Like, it sounds cliched, but any good educator will also be constantly reflecting. Really interesting, because in the prep for this call, we were also talking about maybe, or for this recording, we're also saying about using different terms, being colloquial or different, and that's it. Also, you're also checking in with maybe the lowest level or person that might have the biggest questions, that's who you're trying to educate. You're trying to educate not the person who's flying ahead. It's being accessible to all and being understandable by all. And so it was constantly checking in, and that's a very transferable skill. And I think that's would be one of it's, people, the thing about it is, and let me draw an analogy for you. People think they can learn anything off YouTube nowadays. For example, you read all these things. Oh, you can become an internet entrepreneur. Just watch this video or do this, follow what I do on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram. It's not the same as real practical applied learning and taking, for example, how I might have run a class when I would assign groups and get them to practice what they've learned. How do you set up the norms for a video meeting, which was one of the assessments, for example? How do you set the agenda, the meeting norms, etc., etc.? And then students see it from the leader's side, from the organizer's side. And that's a learning in itself, that it takes this extra effort. It takes extra mastery. It's not perfect. It's always evolving. And that was fascinating during the pandemic for me.
For many employers, for many CEOs and senior executives and managers, there's a struggle. I don't want to have to deal with all of this. The changes that we're seeing, which are inevitable and need to be absorbed and understood and managed and optimized for, really are helped by working in a focused and deliberate way, because you're actually really changing so much about your environment. What are some of the other epiphanies and challenges that you've had to overcome, both in terms of how you're working and also how you're living, not necessarily as a family, but as an independent worker? And I don't mean independent worker as being a freelancer, but just in terms of how you're working as somebody who is trying to be aware of how they work and how to produce the best results for whomever your client or employer is.
Definitely managing expectations and the nuances in that.
Okay.
The nuances in that has been a massive learning curve, because even as good as you can be at communicating, validating and revalidating, we just spoke about it already, someone else's interpretation of what you might think the request is,
right,
or whatever it may be, it is massive. I cannot underestimate or like overemphasize how do you understand this, and what then does that mean, and keeping that conversation open, right? That if
and that's both live and asynchronous as well. Okay,
exactly. And I think when we talk, and I know this is very much your domain with psychological safety and EQ or EI, that it's really interesting that leaders don't get thought how to have those conversations, like even the scripts or the role play or the scenarios, because so that's really of interest to me. And I'm a work in progress on that always, but the awareness that, hang on, okay, maybe there's a disjoint here and it's about expectations. I mean, isn't it interesting? Because you read books about marriage and all these expectations, human relationship, but how that plays out and how we have maybe, I don't think it should be called difficult conversations, because that even sets it up wrong from a psychological.
Right, yeah.
It's just have honest conversations and change, normalize that this is a pain point when it comes to expectations. So that would be how I would answer that.
Yes, perfect. I see particularly with younger workers, when they're not exactly sure, that they do go and Google it or go to YouTube or whatever because they don't want to look stupid. They're worried enough about their job security. And there are lots of answers there. So that clarity that you're talking about and the safety in order to ensure that I feel comfortable to be asking questions of you is really critical. And then to have the back and forth that you're talking about in terms of making sure that we actually understand it, because you didn't necessarily totally know what you were talking about. And so you clarifying it for yourself and then communicating it incredibly clearly for me is part of that. So there's discomfort on both sides as we're both trying to work through this challenging evolutionary time, which we both need to be able to be vulnerable together. All of those things are hard to do, right?
Totally. But even you just saying that, this is this is also challenging. You know, I need to be vulnerable here too. I don't know the answers. Anything you can say so that it becomes much more human and exchange and heartfelt and all, it just makes it an easier conversation, doesn't it? So, yeah.
So, Rowena, this really makes me think about where this digital existence movement is going, a digital nomad movement, working from everywhere and working from anywhere. This is the direction that things have been going for a long time. And whether it is for people who are single or in couples or families, you've mentioned to me some really exciting developments in this space. I'd love you to share some of those for listeners.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's been some amazing developments over the last few years. And one of the shining lights would be on Madeira Island in Portugal, the digital nomad village there. Thousands and thousands of nomads there. Gonzalo Hall was the trailblazer with that one. And I went to visit there and do a bit of research. Fascinating how the whole island has changed by creating an infrastructure to welcome all types of nomads, provide co-working, provide support services, and then Startup Madeira also supports people who want to stay. So some nomads want to stay, or they want to create a base, or they might want to start up a business, but also it's putting in the infrastructure for them to integrate with local communities. And Madeira was a shining light, but also alongside that, there's been amazing developments for families, as you said, for families that may want to travel together and combine that remote work when one or two parents or caregivers are remote working. And Boundless Life, who I do quite a bit of work with, are an amazing example of that. They're a startup who have 3 locations in Europe, looking at others around the world, in Sintra in Portugal, in Tuscany in Italy, and in Syros in Greece. And what they've done...
nice places.
I know. And what they've done is they've looked at the education side, Sophie, which is fascinating. Because obviously, we've done it as a family. When we went to Gran Canaria, I gave you the example that our daughter was in those different summer camps. But what about more education support, more learning?
Yeah, particularly if you don't want to be homeschooling the whole time, right?
Or if you only children, homeschooling can be a challenge. You want socialization, whatever it may be. So Boundless Life have come in to work alongside world schooling and unschooling as a movement, which is getting more and more awareness nowadays. But they've worked with some amazing academic directors from Finland and some Montessorians using the Montessori method, and they're creating an international curriculum in these different places and in the places that they're opening, where families can drop in and out, pick up modules, etc.
So can they move between the different locations, because that community aspect of it is important for kids, the socialization?
Exactly. So when we were there, we went in August and we had a wonderful time to Sintra, and our daughter during the summer program got extra help with her English. She got one-on-one tuition and it was amazing. And some of the families there were moving like in a mobile caravan around the world together, and some of the ones that were leaving Sintra were going on to meet each other in different groups in Greece, and then maybe going on to Tuscany for the spring.
That's taking like the family vacation to a whole nother level. I love it.
It's fascinating. And I mean, I know that's, and it's really inspirational. So I just find people, when I see the market responding with services and they say, oh, this work from anywhere, you know, it doesn't work for families. I'm like, look at these examples. Where
there clearly is enough that they're picking this up and sort of seeing what the different models are that work for different people.
Exactly. And I mean, primary can be a little bit more complicated, but certainly the international baccalaureate, secondary is much more modular, and therefore why not? Maybe, you know, once a teenager reaches a certain age, they can dip in and out and pick up these different subjects internationally.
When I've traveled during the summer with my kids and staying with friends who were French speaking or Spanish speaking, the kids work out how to get along and they work out how to communicate and whatever their base language is. So I do think that children are both very adaptable, and obviously it makes it easier if they have some friends to be moving with. But the Montessori approach and that international mindset, I think, can lead to some very powerful results in terms of also the global citizen that you have coming out of it and who really looks at the world in a very different way. First of all, from the employee perspective, what can they do to set themselves up for success on this journey to be working from many different places in a practical way? How can they be most productive? Just a few things that can help.
Well, another way of looking at that sort of dreaded P word is, how is it more sustainable for you as a person? How can you do it where you're performing to your best ability? And I know sustainable gets used about the environment, but I'm using that word on purpose here because it's a really good question to think about it with that hat on, because actually what are we all poor on? And it's time. So once we throw in travel and working together, people think, oh, I can travel and work, but they forget that travel is an act in itself. It's an act. It often involves transit, layovers, problems with connections.
Takes energy.
It causes stress, 66%. One of the pieces of research said, especially during COVID, 66% had enhanced stress thinking of any flight travel because of wearing masks, because of delays. And I still think there's a lot of people out there who, once you talk about travel, they do feel a bit nervous. Once it's over a few hours. So we have to think about that act of travel, and we have to think of it sustainable. And so regardless of your status as a worker or a professional, I really advise, and we spoke about this already, I really recommend that people adjust their expectations and they clearly communicate that to their team, to their leaders, whoever, their colleagues, because it's very much about not underestimating the impact of travel. And then let me join that together with you. If we don't underestimate it, we suddenly take a different look at it. We say, okay, I can remote work and travel, but can I add a few days on if I can remote work and travel? So 10 years ago, maybe we were going to a client's office or an event and we weren't set up for totally remote working, whereas most people are now. So if you can do that, can you travel slower? Can you extend your time? Can you take it easy on the way back rather than rushing to and from?
That's a great point.
Right? What do we do when we slow travel, Sophie? We cut carbon emissions. We're more mindful. We're not as tired, potentially, because we're not racing for red eyes. We're not crossing time zones. We're also speaking, hopefully, to all our contacts, our network, and saying, hang on a minute here. If you want me to add this into my list of things to do and do it well, represent our company, present at a conference or whatever it may be, I need to readjust expectations a little bit. We need to look at workload, and we need to make sure that with the act of travel, I can do it as well within my performance that I can, and that I'm managing everyone's expectations, because we can use remote work to supplement and complement that, but we have to do it with intention. And therefore, if we think about it like that, it becomes much more sustainable for us as human beings, for an organization, for the expectations or the requirements of wherever we're traveling to, those dependencies, those stakeholders, but also for the planet.
Yes, very much. It's lovely to hear you use the word sustainable, because I do also use that for businesses in terms of how they're treating employees and how employees are setting themselves up in where they're working. So from the employer perspective, the managing of distributed teams is not easy, and managing a team is not necessarily a natural skill that many people have. In fact, very few people have it. And we need to certainly be doing more training of managers generally. If we're thinking about people who are remote working and being digital nomads, what's the difference between that a manager or employee can be thinking about and be aware of to really recognize, how can I include that person and help that person be as productive as possible if I'm going to have them join my team in whatever capacity?
Great question. And it links back to the previous answer as well. If someone is a digital nomad, it depends on their amount of movement, how they're transiting to the different places. And increasingly, there's a big slow travel movement that's emerged. And let me explain why. It's because of things like sustainability, but also the original digital nomads were often their own bosses. They were mainly freelance. And the research is showing now there's more employees, there's more companies like Airbnb encouraging more work from anywhere and moving around. But a lot of nomads find that they have a sweet spot of sort of 1, 2, 3 months in places. Okay. So if you're a team leader or an employer with nomads or people who are trying out workations or work from anywhere, it's all about understanding that they're going to take some time in the transit, in the travel, like what you said, Sophie, setting up, finding their place to work, finding their rhythm, and being flexible and understanding potentially around those few days, week or two at either end of that. And it sounds so fundamental, but I'm going to suggest it as a leader, as someone running an organization. Have you taken a workation? Have you gone off truly and tried and thought, yeah, I'll extend that visit to family. I'll add in a couple of days. Listening to Rowena and Sophie, I might say, okay, I'll put a day in as well to enjoy the place where I am. Because that's part of when you get up in the morning and say, I'm going to do my work, but in the afternoon, I'm doing a walking tour in Lisbon, or I'm going to that museum or gallery. It's suddenly where you start to understand the mentality. You get an insight into the mentality of digital nomads, because apart from craving a certain type of mindset, they're also craving new experiences through travel while they work. And therefore, it's that balance of realizing that's where they get their motivation from. And therefore, not overworking, doing the work needed, getting it done, performing really well. But then going, I'm in Lisbon. I need to go and enjoy those amazing galleries. I need to go on that boat tour. I need to do the things I've always wanted to do in Lisbon and enjoy the place that they're in. And the only way that anyone can understand that and walk in someone's shoes is to try it themselves. So that would be my advice to anyone who's sort of curious about being a good leader. And also to add to that, and we touched on it, but it's so fundamental. It is one thing to sit in a home office or sit in a hybrid model or sit maybe in your it's a total other thing. And we were comparing tech and how we travel with tech and different things earlier. It's all about testing your mobile kit, going out and trying new places, bringing your laptop stand or riser, having the right mic that's portable, etc., etc., etc. And you can't do that if you're only working from 1 or 2 very secure comfort zone places remotely. You can't do it.
Very true. And learning, sitting in a hotel and needing to record something, and of course you have the bounce against the wall and it sounds terrible. You go, okay, definitely need to change that one. I think there's something so profound in what you're saying on the highest level. I've always talked or advised people to live and work outside the country in terms of the perspective it gives you about your own country and about other people, and assimilating and really trying to get into the daily life there and going to the local farmers market, and how that changes how you think. And so when you're saying for leaders to do that, for them to be experiencing going to that extra gallery and having a couple more days for the walking tour, it is that working in the morning and setting themselves up to understand more of what the full experience of being in that country is, that can be so beneficial for them as a leader for their business, to understand the local markets there and be perhaps visiting markets of their own business so they can really understand their customers better. I think that those are some really incredible experiences that they can be learning from and helping their employees learn from, and encouraging them to have some digital nomad experience in order to get those experiences.
It's so true, because when we were, and I'm guilty, when we were sort of, landed in for conferences, I did it in Florida many years ago, literally helicoptered in when I was consulting in my early career, chaperoned round by just the organizers, and then back out to the airport. I mean, that was that was business travel. That was, and you weren't connecting with anyone. Extend that out to, I'm going to spend a few extra days in wherever, Miami. I'm going to try out a couple of co-working spaces and maybe meet with some if there's any of my team there. It's a totally different way of thinking about it, but it's through those individual, like global citizenship is through those exchanges, those sort of really ad hoc, sporadic, going to a fruit market, going to a shop, whatever, the taxi driver that he or she's sharing local. That's where every entrepreneur or business person can learn about culture in a different place. And the reaction to, when a taxi driver says to you, "Oh, what do you do?" or what you, and you explain, you suddenly start to see things through a different light. And it's good for you as a human being, but it's really good for you understanding the global market we all live in now because of digitization.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. It's very hard to explain this because it means we spoke about how flexibility and experiencing the world is such a personal thing. And so that's why I also want to bring in what interests you. So listening to us talking about these exotic places or places that might sound exotic, what interests you? What are you into? Right. Is it food? Is it art? Is it sports? And then extend your trip and look for a couple of those things and weave in a bit of work. Let's be honest, you don't want to be working 12 hours each of those days. It's not going to work. But figure it out and be open to new experiences, but connect through those things that you may like. And suddenly it makes travel much more enjoyable. And it makes this whole way of living, which is opening up. I think you get it on an emotional level then, Sophie, so that it becomes something that you're more curious about naturally as a human being. And again, it might not be for absolutely everyone, and not everything is, but if anything we're sharing resonates, I would encourage people to be curious and give it a try.
That's a very powerful way to be thinking about it. So I guess what's the opposite of a staycation? It's going on vacation and then adding some work on the end so you don't have to rush back and you can do some work there. I love that. I think that's a great piece of advice for people to explore a very different way of thinking about travel to anywhere else, that you can tack some work on the end and just make it a different experience.
And I also have a wonderful team member, my freelance team, and she's a tourism master's graduate. And she always makes me think, because my background's on tourism, and sometimes when we exchange, she says, well, tourism is even visiting, that village an hour away from your home that you've always, or again, if there's an internet connection, so tourism doesn't have to be even, and enjoying travel, it doesn't have to be getting on planes, it doesn't have to be massive amounts. It can be going and trying something new that's even when you're within your region. And some of my work at the moment is with some Indian projects for digital nomadism, believe it or not. And for India is all their internal market is Indians because it's such a massive huge country. So again, even in my work day to day, even though I might seem well traveled, I'm always learning. I'm thinking for someone from Kerala, it's amazing that they can go up to Goa or up to the Himalayas.
Sure. In this new work situation where it is lifelong learning, that really helps encourage and stimulate that type of approach. You've given an amazing piece of advice. What haven't I asked you that I should have done?
I think we've covered so much. But isn't it interesting because the but, because I often get the but I'm not really a digital nomad, but but this or but I can't do work from anywhere because I'm on my own or I'm solo or I'm too old or all of those things we were saying as well, that now, like the example of Boundless Life for families, there's so many things out there. So many, and the remote years, the Selenas, all the different.
What's
Selena is a co-living for digital nomads. They've actually floated on NASDAQ. It's an offering for digital nomad. They've got different locations all around the world, and you can stay together in their property.
And you were saying there were other communities for other different types, like singles or older people.
Yeah, and Mita Carriman with Adventurely. She's got a wonderful project down in Mexico where she does a month-long supported stay for different solo travelers who want to connect with the local people in Mexico and share knowledge and have positive impact. So So I guess, all the things that you might come up with and say, but nomads they're not connecting with communities, they're ruining
Right.
cities, or they're doing it.
Right.
Already the market, already the amazing community in these different places of nomads are saying, how can we counteract that? How can we come up with...
The reality is different.
The reality is totally different. So that was the only thing I wanted to add. And anyone who wants to reach out to me, anyone who wants to say, but I think please do. And I'm connected with so many wonderful communities. If you're curious, if you want some questions answered, reach out via LinkedIn, and I'll happily share what I can, so that, because for me it was life-changing for our family, going back to the start, and therefore that's where the passion and advocacy comes from, the energy.
There was a lot of remote work before the pandemic, and there was so much more learning under very stressful conditions as well, that across education and across work, that have really powered the ability for all kinds of employees and all kinds of positions to be working in many different situations at all levels of companies across all sectors. So it's a very powerful development. Thank you so much, Rowena, for your time. And it's absolute delight to connect and chat with you. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully either in Spain or Portugal or somewhere in between, and more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie. It's been wonderful. A pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks again so much to Rowena Hennigan, remote work expert, academic author and researcher at TU Dublin. You can follow Rowena on LinkedIn, Twitter at row_remote, RO_REMOTE, and visit her website, rowenahennigan.com, ROWENAHENNIGAN.com. Please check out her very new LinkedIn learning course, Staying Productive When You Remote Work and Travel. She also has a popular newsletter called The Remote Work Digest. Immediate action tip. What new digital nomad experience might you explore, considering the emerging and expanding options that include work trip extensions, new tourist locations, and nurtured nomad communities? Thanks for listening. Digital nomads are one segment of the remote working population, which is growing and continuing to evolve as technology allows us each to enhance our working lives in many different ways. To understand more aspects of the tech-driven but talent-focused new era of business and work, please take a look at or listen to my new book, Empathy Works, The Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work. If you enjoy this podcast, do tell a friend and write a quick review wherever you listen. For weekly video updates, please follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at @SophieWade. For curated, useful articles, research, and information to help navigate this period of transformation, sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter on LinkedIn and my blog, which is available on sophiewade.com and flexelnetwork.com. Until next time.